The 7 modern wonders include lost cities that stand as reminders of fallen empires, religious statues hovering over modern skylines, and colossal monuments that have stood the test of time. Selected based on a 2001 poll that ran for 6 years, these 7 structures are the most astonishing portrayals of what humanity has achieved through history. But before we dive deeper into that list, we will tell the story of the only ancient wonder of the world that survives to this day. More than 4,500 years ago, something unbelievable happened on the edge of the Sahara Desert. In 2600 BC, on the western bank of the Nile, Pharaoh Khufu ordered building something that would outshine every other structure on Earth for 4,000 years. It is the only ancient wonder of the world still standing today, the Great Pyramid of Giza. The pyramid rises about 138 meters today, but what we see today is a skeleton. Originally, it was even taller. When it was completed, the entire exterior was encased in smooth white limestone, polished to a finish so reflective that it could be seen from the mountains of Israel, over 400 kilometers away. It didn't look like a rough, stepped structure. It looked like a solid blade of white light rising out of the sand. At its very tip sat a capstone plated in gold, catching the sun like a mirror held up to the sky. That version of the pyramid no longer exists. Over centuries, the casing stones were stripped away and used to build mosques and palaces across Cairo. What tourists photograph today is the exposed inner core, the scaffolding, essentially, of something that was once almost impossibly beautiful. But none of that is the real mystery. The real mystery is, how did they build such a colossal structure 5 millennia ago? For context, the construction effort to build the Pyramid of Giza involved moving 2.3 million stone blocks with an average weight of around 2.5 to 15 tons each. The heaviest ones, deep in the king's chamber, came from Aswan, 900 kilometers south, and weighed up to 80 tons. That's the equivalent of 12 adult African elephants per block. These stones were then lifted as high as 146 meters, with no cranes, no steel, no engines. But how could that be possible? On paper, this seems so far beyond what an ancient civilization should be capable of that it has given rise to speculation that this ancient giant was actually built by aliens. However, the archaeological records discovered over centuries tell the story of erecting this ancient marvel. For a long time, people believed slaves built the pyramids under whips and chains. That image became popular through ancient stories and Hollywood movies. But modern excavations near the site tell a different story. Archaeologists found worker villages, bakeries, breweries, organized cemeteries for laborers. These weren't disposable slaves. Many were skilled workers who were fed, paid, and even honored for their work. Most historians believe tens of thousands of laborers worked in rotating crews. During the annual flooding of the Nile, farmers couldn't work their land. That off-season may have allowed the state to mobilize huge workforces. However, the workforce alone does not solve the engineering problems. The first problem that the 20,000 workers on the site had to solve was moving 2.5-ton blocks across desert sand. At that, weight blocks are guaranteed to dig in. The sleds grind to a halt. You can have 1,000 workers and still go nowhere. The Egyptian found a solution to this through simple physics. They wet the sand ahead of the sled to drop friction dramatically. It made the sand more compact, hardened, and helped the sleds glide. Researchers confirmed this in 2014 when they found a tomb painting showing workers pouring liquid in front of a sled carrying a massive statue. But now to the bigger question. How did those blocks move to the height of a 40-story modern skyscraper and were installed as accurately as within 1 degree of error? For centuries, the leading theory involved ramps, a straight ramp running from the base up one side of the pyramid. Simple enough in concept, except when you run the numbers, the ramp itself becomes a problem bigger than the pyramid. To maintain a workable incline, that ramp would need to extend nearly 2 kilometers into the desert. The material required to build it would rival the pyramid's own volume. You'd essentially be building 2 massive structures to end up with one, so maybe a spiraling ramp wrapping around the outside of the pyramid as it rose. more efficient. But then you lose sight of the corners. You can't measure the angles. You can't ensure that 4 sides, each 230 meters long, meet perfectly at a single point at the top. And the Great Pyramid's base is level to within 2.1 centimeters across its entire footprint. That's not an accident. That's the kind of precision that makes modern engineers uncomfortable. In 2003, a French architect named Jean-Pierre Houdin proposed something different. After 7 years of research and 3D modeling, he suggested that the Egyptians used 2 ramps, not one, a straight external ramp for the bottom third of the pyramid, where the blocks were heaviest and most numerous. And then, for the upper 2/3, an internal ramp, a tunnel spiraling upward through the pyramid itself, like a corkscrew hidden inside the structure. It solves the problems the other theories don't. The external ramp stays short enough to be practical, the corners stay visible, and the internal ramp, once construction finished, would simply be sealed, becoming part of the pyramid's interior mass. What makes this more than just an elegant theory is what happened in the 1980s, when the pyramid was scanned using microgravimetry, a technique that measures variations in density. The scan wasn't looking for ramps, it was looking for hidden chambers. It didn't find any, but it did find something else. A spiral of lower density material running through the upper portion of the pyramid, exactly where Houdin's internal ramp would be. No one has been able to get close enough to confirm it. No entrance to any internal tunnel has ever been found, so the evidence, if there is any, sits inside the pyramid, unreachable, giving rise to more and more theories. To this day, no one can tell what happened with 100% accuracy, but as called out by experts, to say that the aliens built this means robbing the ancient civilization of one of humanity's greatest achievements. Something that is difficult to imagine today was built almost 5,000 years ago, and the remnants are still standing to tell their story. But while the pyramids in Egypt have fascinated explorers for thousands of years, humanity has built similar structures across the world, just like the ones on southern Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula. Twice a year, on the spring and autumn equinox, something happens at a pyramid in southern Mexico that has been happening for over 1,000 years. As the sun moves across the sky in the late afternoon, it catches the edges of the pyramid's 9 terraced platforms and casts a series of triangular shadows along the northern staircase. Those shadows, falling one after another in sequence, create the unmistakable silhouette of a serpent descending from the top of the pyramid to the ground, where a carved stone snakehead sits waiting at the base of the stairs. The serpent appears, it holds for a few hours, then the sun moves on and it vanishes. This wasn't a coincidence. The Maya built it that way. They calculated the precise orientation of the pyramid, the exact angle of each terrace, the specific height of every platform, so that on those 2 days each year, the sun would do exactly that. A civilization without computers, without modern surveying equipment, without any of the tools we consider basic to precision construction, engineered a light show into a 30-meter pyramid that still works perfectly today. That is Chichen Itza. And the serpent is just the beginning. Chichen Itza sits in the Yucatan Peninsula in southeastern Mexico, and for several centuries it was one of the most powerful cities in the entire Maya world. At its peak, somewhere between 600 and 1200 AD, it may have been home to over 50,000 people, a metropolis by the standards of any civilization at the time. The city covered nearly 5 square kilometers and contained temples, observatories, ball courts, and marketplaces. It was a political, religious, and commercial center that drew people from across Mesoamerica. Built around 600 AD, the city lies in the middle of one of the most arid stretches of the Yucatan Peninsula, where there are no rivers, no lakes, and rainfall averages just enough to stay alive on. The city exists entirely because of cenotes, the massive natural sinkholes punched through the limestone bedrock by millions of years of groundwater erosion, exposing underground wells below. That's where the city gets its name. Chichen Itza literally means at the mouth of the well of the Itza. Without those sinkholes, there would be no settlement, no pyramid, no empire. The Maya were extraordinary astronomers. Without telescopes, they calculated the length of the solar year to within minutes of what we know today. They tracked Venus across the sky with enough precision to predict its cycles 500 years into the future. Their calendar system was so sophisticated that it's still studied by mathematicians, and all of that knowledge was baked into the architecture of Chichen Itza. The city had paved streets with cut stone. It had a network of elevated causeways that connected the major structures and extended outward toward neighboring towns. Many European cities during the same period had no concept of paved streets. At the heart of it all stood El Castillo, the pyramid most people picture when they think of Chichen Itza. The name means the castle in Spanish, which is what the conquistadors called it when they arrived because they had no framework for understanding what it actually was. It wasn't a castle, it was a calendar. El Castillo has 4 sides, each with a staircase of 91 steps. Multiply that by 4 and add the single step of the top platform and you get 365, the number of days in a solar year. Each of the pyramid's 9 terraced levels is divided in 2 by the staircases, giving 18 sections per side, the number of months in the Maya calendar. The pyramid wasn't just a line to the sun, it was a physical representation of how the Maya understood time itself. The Great Ball Court at Chichen Itza is the largest in Mesoamerica, 168 meters long and 70 meters wide, flanked by walls 12 meters high. The game played there involved a rubber ball that could not be touched with hands or feet. Players used their hips, knees, and elbows to keep it moving and drive it through a stone ring mounted high on the wall. The acoustics of the court are so precise that a whisper at one end can be heard clearly at the other, 168 meters away. What is known is that the ball game carried serious religious weight. It reenacted a Maya creation myth, and losing wasn't just a defeat. Some evidence suggests that the losing team, or possibly the winning team, was sacrificed at the end of major games. Carved reliefs on the court walls showed decapitation scenes. Whatever was happening at that court, it wasn't a sport in the way we understand the word. By the early 13th century, Chichen Itza had collapsed as a political power. The reasons are still debated: prolonged drought, internal conflict, the rise of competing city-states. The population dispersed, the temples were abandoned, the jungle moved in slowly, swallowing the edges of the city, climbing the walls, filling in the spaces between buildings. When Spanish conquistadors arrived in the 16th century, they found a place that the Maya themselves still considered sacred, still visited for rituals, still feared, but no longer inhabited. The Spanish had little interest in understanding what they found. They destroyed Maya manuscripts, tore down religious objects, and forced conversion on the surviving population. Of the thousands of Maya books that existed, only 4 survived. The knowledge encoded in them was almost entirely lost in a matter of decades. What we know about the Maya today comes largely from archaeology, from the buildings they left behind, and from the handful of written records that weren't burned, which makes what the buildings do tell us even more remarkable. El Castillo, the ball court, the Temple of the Warriors, the observatory they called El Caracol, each one is a piece of a larger intellectual system. They built their knowledge into the landscape so permanently that even centuries of abandonment, conquest, and jungle overgrowth couldn't erase it. From southern Mexico, we move to the world's longest structure in China that was built over centuries. In the 7th century BC, the rulers of northern China had a problem that kept getting worse. From the steppes beyond their borders, nomadic tribes were raiding their settlements. They came fast, on horseback, hit hard, and disappeared before any organized defense could respond. Crops were destroyed, villages were burned, people were taken, and no matter how many soldiers were stationed at the border, the raids kept coming because the border itself didn't really exist. It was just open land, and open land can be crossed from anywhere. The solution that emerged wasn't a military one. It was a construction project. If you couldn't patrol everything, you built something that did it for you. A wall, not around a city, but around an entire civilization. What began as a series of disconnected fortifications built by individual states to protect their own territory eventually became the longest structure ever built by human hands. The Great Wall of China stretches over 21,000 kilometers across mountains, deserts, and river valleys. It passes through more than 400 towns. In some places, it rises to 9 meters high, wide enough at the top for 5 horses to ride side by side. However, the wall that exists today is not the wall that those early rulers built. That version came much later, and the story of why it was rebuilt is as interesting as the story of how it was first constructed. By the 3rd century BC, the warring states of northern China had unified under the Qin dynasty. The first emperor, Qin Shi Huang, connected the existing walls and extended them into a single continuous line of defense. It was an extraordinary undertaking, but the construction was brutal. Hundreds of thousands of workers were conscripted into labor. Supply lines stretched across impossible terrain. Workers who died on site, which many did from exhaustion, injury, and starvation, were buried within the wall itself. The wall became as much a grave as a fortification. And yet, it wasn't enough. Dynasties rose and fell. The wall was breached, abandoned in sections, and left to decay. For nearly 1,000 years, large parts of it crumbled back into the landscape. Then came the Ming dynasty in the 14th century, and with it, the wall that the world knows today. The Ming rulers had good reason to be afraid. They had come to power after expelling the Mongols, who had conquered China and ruled it for nearly a century. The memory of that occupation was still raw, and the threat hadn't disappeared. The Mongols were still out there, still organized, still dangerous. The Ming response was to rebuild the wall on a scale that dwarfed everything that had come before. They didn't just repair what existed, they redesigned it. The new wall was built primarily from brick and stone rather than rammed earth, which made it significantly stronger and more durable. Watchtowers were added at regular intervals, spaced so that a signal fire lit at one tower could be seen from the next, making it a communication system that could relay a warning across thousands of kilometers in hours. The scale of this effort is difficult to fully grasp. Some historians estimate that hundreds of thousands of workers were involved at the project's peak, drawn from across the empire. The logistics of moving materials through mountain terrain, feeding and housing a workforce spread across thousands of kilometers, would challenge a modern government with modern tools. The materials used in the Great Wall's construction differ greatly depending on the kind of terrain the wall passed through and the materials available in the surrounding areas. In many places, rammed soil and wood were used, while the strongest sections of the wall were built using marble and bricks. However, what kept the bricks together through centuries of earthquakes, floods, and freezing winters was something no engineer would think to specify today. The mortar used in Ming-era construction contained sticky rice, cooked, mixed into a paste, and combined with slaked lime to create a binding agent that proved stronger and more waterproof than anything else available at the time. Researchers testing samples from Ming-era sections have found that the rice mortar is still intact, still binding, still doing exactly what it was designed to do 600 years later. The wall worked, up to a point. It slowed raids, controlled movement, and gave the Ming military time to respond to incursions. But it never made China truly secure. In 1644, Manchu forces from the northeast didn't breach the wall. A Ming general opened the gates and let them through. The dynasty fell, and the wall, for all its scale and ingenuity, couldn't protect against that. After the Ming collapse, large sections of the wall were left unguarded and unmaintained. Local villagers quarried its bricks for building material. Farmers plowed up its foundations. Centuries of neglect, combined with harsh weather, eroded significant portions entirely. Today, roughly 1/3 of the original Ming wall has disappeared, not through conquest or demolition, but through simple abandonment. What remains is still staggering. The wall's sheer size has given rise to many popular myths, including the one that it is visible from the moon. However, that is not the case. It has been a popular myth since before humanity's first voyage into space. And when the first person to set foot on the moon, Neil Armstrong, was asked about it, he simply said that no man-made structure was visible from the moon. No one knows exactly how many people died building the Great Wall across all its centuries of construction. Estimates run into the hundreds of thousands. Some of them are almost certainly still inside it. Built on human ambition, effort, and sacrifice, the wall has outlasted every dynasty that built it, every threat it was constructed to stop, and every empire that eventually fell on both sides of it. It is still there, crossing the mountains, exactly where they left it. From the eroding Great Wall, we move to the world's most recognizable sporting venue, built by the Roman Empire. In 72 AD, the Emperor Vespasian began construction on a building that Rome had never seen before. He chose a deliberate location, the site of an artificial lake that had belonged to Nero, the previous emperor, who had seized a vast stretch of central Rome for his personal palace complex after the Great Fire of 64 AD. Vespasian drained the lake, cleared the land, and started building on it. The new building was to be funded by the gold and silver looted from Roman conquest in Jerusalem. The proceeds, along with 97,000 prisoners, were loaded onto ships and sailed across the Mediterranean. The same prisoners then broke ground on the largest amphitheater ever built, a structure that would become the most recognizable building the Roman Empire ever produced. The Colosseum took 8 years to build. When Titus, Vespasian's son, opened it in 80 AD, the celebrations ran for 100 consecutive days. It could hold between 50,000 and 80,000 spectators, making it the largest arena in the ancient world and larger than most stadiums built today. It was also one of the first major structures ever built primarily from concrete. The concrete they used was a mixture of volcanic ash, seawater, and lime called pozzolana. It was stronger than anything European builders would manage again for over 1,000 years. This enabled the Romans to construct curved walls and vast open spans at a scale that stone alone couldn't support. The exterior was faced with travertine limestone, fixed with iron clamps rather than mortar. Inside, the seating was arranged across 4 levels, with the social hierarchy of Rome reflected in where you sat. Senators occupied the front rows. The poorest citizens sat at the very top. Beneath the arena floor was an entire hidden city. A network of tunnels, corridors, and chambers ran under the sand where the events took place. This underground complex, known as the Hypogeum, was where the machinery of the spectacle operated. Gladiators waited in holding cells before their fights. Animals were kept in cages and lifted directly onto the arena floor through trapdoors, appearing suddenly in front of tens of thousands of spectators. Elaborate stage sets could be raised from below to transform the arena floor into forests, hills, or battlefield landscapes. The Romans engineered the Hypogeum with the same precision they brought to their roads and bridges, and it worked so effectively that the arena above it could be reconfigured between events without the crowd seeing how it was done. The gladiators who fought there occupied a strange place in Roman society. Many were slaves or prisoners of war, but a significant number were free men who volunteered. A successful gladiator became one of the most recognized figures in the city. The games continued for centuries. Emperors funded them, competed politically through them, and in at least one case participated directly. They became so woven into the fabric of Roman public life that they outlasted several significant political upheavals, continuing even as the empire itself began to weaken. By the 5th century, the Western Roman Empire was coming apart. The money that had funded the games for centuries was no longer available, and the events became less frequent. The last recorded gladiatorial combat in the Colosseum took place around 435 AD. Animal hunts continued for another 100 years after that. Then, those also ended. The arena fell silent. What followed was a slow process of dismantling that went on for centuries. Earthquakes in 847 and 1349 caused significant structural damage. The marble seating was stripped out and repurposed. The iron clamps holding the limestone together were pried from the walls, leaving the pockmarked surface visible on the exterior today. Large sections of the outer wall collapsed or were demolished. Medieval families built houses inside the remaining structure. At various points, it was used as a fortress, a cemetery, a Christian shrine, and a quarry for building material that went into the construction of St. Peter's Basilica and other major buildings across Rome. By the 18th century, enough of it had been taken apart that serious efforts began to preserve what remained. Pope Benedict XIV consecrated the site in the 1740s, which slowed the removal of materials. Restoration work began in the 19th century and has continued in various forms ever since. What stands today is roughly 2/3 of the original structure. The entire south outer wall is gone. The interior seating has almost completely vanished. The wooden arena floor, which covered the hypogeum below, rotted away long ago, leaving the underground chambers fully exposed and visible to visitors walking through the site. Despite what's missing, the scale of what remains is still difficult to process in person. The outer walls rise 48 meters. The footprint covers 6 acres. The building is so large that for centuries after it was abandoned, people living in Rome simply incorporated it into the city around it, building against its walls, sheltering inside its arches, using it as a landmark the way you'd use a hill or a river. It has been standing in one condition or another for nearly 2,000 years. The city around it has been invaded, rebuilt, burned, and transformed beyond recognition multiple times over. The Colosseum has outlasted all of it. In 2023, a new retractable wooden arena floor was installed for the first time since the Middle Ages, allowing events to be held on the surface again. 7 million people visit the Colosseum every year as it remains the most recognizable sports venue in history. To one recognizable monument to another, we move to India, to one of the most visited destinations in the world. In 1631, the Mughal Emperor Shah Jahan was on military campaign in the Deccan region of central India when a messenger reached him with news from home. His wife, Mumtaz Mahal, had died during childbirth. She was delivering their 14th child. Shah Jahan returned to Agra, and within a year of her death, he had begun making plans for a tomb. What he built over the next 2 decades became the Taj Mahal. Construction began in 1632 on the southern bank of the Yamuna River in Agra. Shah Jahan assembled a workforce of around 20,000 laborers drawn from across India and Central Asia, along with architects, calligraphers, and specialists in stonework from as far away as Persia and the Ottoman Empire. Materials came from across the known world. White marble was quarried from Makrana in Rajasthan, around 400 kilometers away. Jade came from China, turquoise from Tibet, sapphires from Sri Lanka. In total, over 1,000 elephants were used to transport materials to the construction site. The Taj Mahal is often described simply as a tomb, but that description undersells what Shah Jahan actually built. The complex covers 17 hectares and includes a main gateway, a mosque, a guest house, formal gardens, and the mausoleum itself. Everything was designed as a single unified composition, with the mausoleum at the far end so that visitors approaching through the gateway see it framed perfectly in the archway before they ever reach it. The mausoleum sits on a raised marble platform at the edge of the river. Its central dome rises 73 meters above the base, surrounded by 4 smaller domes and 4 minarets positioned at the corners of the platform. The minarets are built with a slight outward lean, so that in the event of an earthquake or structural failure, they would fall away from the main tomb rather than onto it. The white marble of the exterior changes appearance depending on the time of day and the quality of the light, shifting from pink in the early morning to bright white at midday to a pale gold at sunset. At night, under a full moon, the entire structure takes on a bluish tint. The interior walls are covered in Petra dura, an inlay technique using precisely cut semi-precious stones set directly into the marble to form intricate floral and geometric patterns. The craftsmen who did this work cut thousands of individual stone pieces, some of them just a few millimeters across, and fitted them together with no visible gaps. A single flower motif on the interior walls can contain over 60 separate pieces of stone. The level of detail throughout the interior is consistent from the floor to the ceiling, in corridors that most visitors pass through in a matter of seconds without looking up. At the center of the mausoleum, in a chamber beneath the main dome, sit 2 cenotaphs, decorative caskets representing Shah Jahan and Mumtaz Mahal. The actual graves are located in a lower chamber directly below, at garden level, following Islamic tradition that burial should be in contact with the earth. Mumtaz Mahal's grave is positioned at the precise center of the entire complex. Shah Jahan's grave, added after his death, sits slightly to the side, the only asymmetric element in an otherwise perfectly balanced structure. That asymmetry was unplanned. Shah Jahan had not intended to be buried in the Taj Mahal at all. His original plans called for a second mausoleum across the river, built in black marble, connected to the Taj Mahal by a bridge. The two structures would face each other across the Yamuna, white and black, his tomb and hers. However, construction on the Black Mausoleum never began. In 1658, before the second structure could be started, Shah Jahan was deposed by his own son, Aurangzeb, who seized the throne and imprisoned his father in Agra fort. Shah Jahan spent the last 8 years of his life confined to a room in that fort with a view across the river to the Taj Mahal. When he died in 1666, Aurangzeb had him buried beside Mumtaz Mahal in the tomb he had built for her, which is why the perfect symmetry of the interior has that one deviation. His cenotaph was added into a space that was never designed to hold it. The Taj Mahal took 21 years to complete. The construction cost, in contemporary estimates, equates to roughly $1 billion. When it was finished in 1653, it represented the full creative and financial resources of one of the wealthiest empires on Earth, directed toward a single structure for 2 decades. Over the following centuries, the complex went through significant periods of neglect. During the period of British rule in India, the gardens were redesigned in a more formal English style, altering the original layout. During both World Wars, the Indian government erected scaffolding around the main dome to disguise it from potential aerial attack, a precaution taken again during the Indo-Pakistani Wars of 1965 and 1971. The white marble has also been affected by air pollution from vehicles and a nearby iron foundry, which operated for decades close enough to the site to cause visible yellowing of the stone. The foundry was eventually shut down following a Supreme Court order in 1996, and ongoing restoration efforts have worked to clean and preserve the marble since then. Around 8 million people visit the Taj Mahal every year, making it one of the most visited monuments on Earth. Moving on, we will feature some of the most impressive lost cities in history. High in the Andes Mountains of Peru, nearly 2,500 meters above sea level, lies a city that was never meant to be found. Hidden between sharp mountain peaks and surrounded by thick cloud forest, Machu Picchu remained invisible to the outside world for centuries. No Spanish soldier ever recorded destroying it. No colonial city was built on top of it. It simply vanished into the mountains. At its peak, around 500 to 700 people lived in these ruins permanently, and no one knows exactly what it was. Some say it was a royal retreat for the Inca emperor. Others say it might have been a religious site with its temples, astronomical alignments, and sacred stones pointing to spiritual significance. For some, it was simply a hideout in case of a war. However, the most fascinating part about these ruins is their incredible construction that has preserved them for centuries. Machu Picchu was built in the 15th century during the height of the Inca Empire. At the time, the Inca controlled a vast territory stretching along the western edge of South America. They had no written language in the traditional sense, no iron tools, and no wheeled transport. Yet they built one of the most astonishing mountain cities in human history. The city sits on a narrow ridge between 2 mountains, with a river curving far below. On 3 sides, steep cliffs act as natural defenses. From a distance, the site is almost invisible, blending into the surrounding peaks. But building a city set in stone would have been extremely difficult. There are no nearby flat plains, no easy access roads. Every stone had to be shaped and positioned on a steep mountainside prone to earthquakes and heavy rainfall. To fight the elements, the Inca used a method called ashlar masonry. Massive stones were cut and shaped so precisely that they fit together without mortar. No cement, no glue, just stone against stone. Some blocks weigh several tons, yet you cannot slide a paper between them. This wasn't just an aesthetic detail, it served a purpose. The Andes region is seismically active. When earthquakes hit, the tightly fitted stones can shift slightly and then settle back into place. That flexibility has protected the city from collapse for centuries. But how did they move those stones? The Inca had no horses, no oxen, and no wheels for transport. Most likely, workers dragged stones using ropes and wooden logs as rollers. Thousands of laborers may have been involved, organized under a system known as mita, a form of state labor tribute. Citizens would contribute labor to imperial projects instead of paying taxes. And then there's the engineering beneath the surface. About 60% of Machu Picchu is underground. The visible terraces and buildings are supported by deep foundations made of layers of stone chips and gravel. These layers act as drainage systems, preventing rainwater from destabilizing the structures. In a region that experiences heavy rainfall, that drainage system may be the reason the city still stands. The agricultural terraces also served multiple purposes. They created flat land for farming, prevented soil erosion, and stabilized the slopes. Every level of the city reflects careful planning. Less than 100 years after Machu Picchu was built, the Inca Empire came under siege from the Spanish. The invaders destroyed every city in their wake, aiming to leave no trace of what was once a burgeoning civilization. However, they could not find Machu Picchu. That's because as soon as the residents heard of the Spanish invasion, they abandoned the city. However, they wanted to protect the city, possibly with a plan to return one day. They burned all records of what they built along with the surrounding forests and any paths that could lead up the mountain. Machu Picchu remained hidden for centuries. That was until 1911, when a Yale historian named Hiram Bingham arrived in Cuzco in hope of discovering the lost city of Vilcabamba. Bingham met with a local farmer who pointed the expedition towards these ruins sitting on a mountain. Bingham called it the Lost City of the Incas, but was later popularized as Machu Picchu. Since then, Machu Picchu has become a global icon. Millions visit each year, climbing the same steep paths once used by the Inca. The government has had to limit entry to 5,000 people to slow the erosion of the stones that have endured centuries of massive earthquakes and heavy rainfall. Imagine you're a spice merchant somewhere around 50 BC. You've just spent 3 weeks crossing the Arabian desert with a camel train loaded with frankincense and myrrh, goods worth more per ounce than gold in Rome. You're exhausted, you're filthy, and then your guide leads you into a narrow crack in a canyon wall. The passage is so tight your camels barely fit. The walls tower 80 meters on either side, and for nearly a kilometer, there's nothing but shadow and the sound of hooves on stone. Then the canyon opens, and carved directly into the rose-red cliff face in front of you is a building the size of a 12-story tower. Columns, friezes, statues, intricate decorative reliefs, all cut from a single continuous wall of rock with a precision that rivals anything in Athens or Alexandria. That was the treasury, and it was just the front door. The people who built Petra were the Nabateans, originally desert nomads who figured out something everyone else had missed. The ancient world ran on incense. Frankincense and myrrh weren't just for temples. They were used in medicine, in embalming, in perfume, in virtually every religious ceremony from Egypt to Rome. And all of it came from southern Arabia. The Nabateans controlled the trade routes north. They didn't just move the goods, they taxed them. Historical records suggest they levied around 25% on imports passing through their territory. By the 1st century AD, Petra's population had swelled to somewhere between 20,000 and 30,000 people, a significant city by ancient standards, buried deep in the mountains of what is now southern Jordan, and they built it in a way that had almost no precedent in the ancient world. Almost every civilization builds upward. You lay a foundation, stack materials, raise walls, add a roof. The Nabateans did the opposite. They looked at a cliff face and carved inward and downward, removing stone rather than adding it. The treasury wasn't constructed, it was excavated. The stonemasons started at the top. Engineers would identify the section of cliff they wanted and climb to where the roofline would eventually be. From there, working level by level with pickaxes and chisels, they carved a narrow ledge across the full width of the facade, essentially creating a blank canvas in the rock. Then they worked downward, tier by tier, cutting each column in sequence from above. The whole facade, 40 meters tall and 28 meters wide, with 2 full stories of columns and sculpture, was carved without ever building upward from the ground. Estimates suggest the treasury alone took somewhere between 3 and 4 years to complete, with teams of masons working simultaneously across different sections of the face. And the stone they cut away wasn't wasted. It was carted across the city and used to build Petra's freestanding structures. Across the canyon walls of Petra, there are over 800 monuments carved in this same tradition. tombs, temples, a theater with seating for 8,500 people cut directly into the hillside. The city is essentially a mountain that was hollowed out from the inside. The water engineering was arguably as impressive as any of the carvings. Petra sits in a desert that receives on average less than 90 millimeters of rain per year, about the same as the driest parts of the Sahara. And yet, at its peak, it supported a population of up to 30,000 people, plus the constant flow of caravans arriving with hundreds of camels that each needed significant water just to function. The primary supply came from 9 natural springs scattered across the surrounding mountains, the main one located about 7 kilometers from the city center. The Nabateans carved channels and laid over 200 kilometers of ceramic pipeline to route that water downhill into Petra. The cisterns were carved into the bedrock, plastered watertight, and deliberately concealed to protect them from evaporation and from any potential invaders. The Zaraba Reservoir near the city entrance was large enough to hold roughly a 3-week water supply on its own, ready to be released when a large caravan rolled in. And then there was the flood problem. The same mountains that fed Petra with precious runoff also funneled catastrophic flash floods down the canyon every winter. So the Nabateans built a diversion dam and a tunnel at the canyon entrance to intercept those floods and redirect them before they ever reached the city. When archaeologists excavated the Siq in the 20th century, they found the ancient flood tunnel still there. In 2018, when the tunnel was no longer maintained, a single winter storm sent a flash flood through the canyon that killed several tourists. The system had worked for 1,000 years. Without it, the city simply couldn't have existed. The Romans eventually absorbed the Nabatean kingdom in 106 AD, but Petra continued functioning as a major hub for another 2 centuries. What finally killed it wasn't conquest. It was a catastrophic earthquake in 363 AD, followed by a gradual shift in trade routes as sea lanes replaced overland caravans. By the 7th century, the city was largely empty. The local Bedouin knew it was there. To the rest of the world, it had ceased to exist. For roughly 1,000 years, that's how it stayed. In 1812, a Swiss explorer named Johann Ludwig Burckhardt heard rumors of a lost city in the Jordanian mountains. To gain access, he disguised himself as a Muslim pilgrim making a sacrifice at the tomb of the prophet Aaron, which happened to be located just above Petra. His guide led him through the same narrow canyon the spice merchants had used 2 millennia earlier and out into the same view. He was the first Westerner in recorded history to see it. Today, around 1 million tourists a year make that walk. In 2024, archaeologists excavating beneath the treasury found a tomb containing 12 skeletons, the building's original occupants, finally identified after 2,000 years. Most of Petra is still unexcavated. The Nabateans left over 800 carved monuments in these canyon walls, and the majority of what lies behind them has never been touched by a modern shovel. In 1922, Brazil was preparing to celebrate 100 years of independence. Across the country, there were debates about identity, faith, and the future of a rapidly modernizing nation. Out of that moment came an idea, bold, visible, and impossible to ignore: a giant statue of Jesus Christ overlooking Rio de Janeiro. Today, Christ the Redeemer stands 30 meters tall atop Mount Corcovado, with arms stretching 28 meters wide. Including its pedestal, the monument rises over 38 meters above the mountain peak. From below, it appears almost weightless, hovering above the city and the Atlantic Ocean beyond. The original concept was very different. Early sketches showed Christ holding a cross in one hand and a globe in the other, a more traditional religious pose. However, engineers wanted it to be more unique. The final design shows Christ with open arms, forming a giant cross shape. It's welcoming, protective, and visible from nearly every part of the city. It was transformed from a religious monument to a national symbol standing with open arms in a country balancing tradition and modernity. But building something of that scale in the early 20th century was anything but simple. The man behind the engineering challenge was Brazilian engineer Heitor da Silva Costa. The sculptural design was developed by French artist Paul Landowski, but the statue itself was not fully built in Brazil. Instead, the design was first modeled in clay in France. The pieces were then carefully transported across the Atlantic to Rio de Janeiro. From there, the parts had to be moved up Mount Corcovado, a steep 700-meter-high granite peak. There were no heavy-lift helicopters in the 1920s. The builders used an existing railway that had been built decades earlier to carry materials up the mountain. From the railway station near the summit, workers transported the pieces manually to the construction site. At first, the statue was planned to be made of reinforced concrete only, but pure concrete would crack and weather quickly in Rio's tropical climate, strong sun, heavy rain, and frequent lightning strikes. So, engineers chose to cover the concrete core with thousands of small triangular tiles made of soapstone. Soapstone is durable and resistant to heat. It also gives the statue its smooth, pale appearance. Workers spent years attaching these tiny stone tiles by hand. Each one was placed individually. If you look closely today, you can still see the mosaic-like surface. Construction officially began in 1926. For 5 years, crews worked on the mountain, battling wind, rain, and limited access. The arms were particularly difficult. Extending 28 meters across, they required careful balance and internal reinforcement to ensure they wouldn't sag or collapse. In 1931, the statue was finally completed. At the inauguration ceremony, engineers attempted something ambitious, lighting the monument remotely from Rome. But the technology failed due to bad weather, and the lights were switched on manually instead. When the new 7 Wonders of the World were chosen in a global vote in 2007, some critics questioned its inclusion. Compared to ancient cities or massive defensive walls, the statue is relatively recent. It was completed in the 20th century. It does not represent a lost civilization or an ancient empire. So why is it on the list? Supporters argue that its impact goes beyond engineering complexity. It has become a global icon. For millions of people, it represents faith, hope, and Brazilian identity. Its silhouette defines Rio de Janeiro as much as its beaches or mountains. There are also misconceptions about the statue. Despite different claims, it is not the largest Jesus monument in the world. Standing at 61 meters tall, the Jesus Christ the Savior statue in North Sumatra, Indonesia, inaugurated in September 2024, is the tallest Jesus statue in the world. Meanwhile, the 52.5-meter-tall Christ the King statue overlooking Lake Toba in Poland comes in second. And despite popular belief, it is not a completely Brazilian creation. It was, in fact, a collaboration between continents, even if its identity remains deeply Brazilian. Unlike Machu Picchu, which was hidden for centuries, Christ the Redeemer was designed to be seen. Its impact on Rio de Janeiro is undeniable. The statue has come to define the city and has become an important part of the culture. Almost 2 million people visit the site every year because of its spiritual hold on millions across the world. These were the 7 modern wonders of the world, but which one did you enjoy the most? Is there another building that could have been worthy of being on this list? Let us know in the comment below. If you enjoyed these marvels from the past, check out our video on the biggest mega projects in Europe to see how far humanity has grown when it comes to modern construction. Keep following Signum, and we will see you in the next video.